my name is Darren Coxon, and what I'm going to do over the next few lessons is take you through a short preparation course for your GCSE English Language. This is not specifically linked to any one syllabus because most of the syllabuses examine the same skills. They're all pretty well doing the same thing. What I will do in other screencasts though is look specifically at some of the exam boards in more detail. But for this preparation course we'll just go through the basic skills that you need in order to pass the exam. Essentially the exam's broken down into two chunks. You're examined on your reading and then your writing. So what I'll do is I'll just go through and break down a little bit more detail what that means. So what we intend to do then is to understand the skills that the examiner will be looking for, and then to have a clearer picture of what we're going to be looking at in more detail in the lessons to follow. So, what does the GCSE language exam examine? Well, first and foremost, how well you can read for information. You need to be able to pick out details, key relevant details, okay? That's the first thing to bear in mind. That word relevant is important because what often will happen is that you'll be given a piece of writing which could lead you down false trails. You need to make sure you don't go down there. You need to make sure that you pick out only the stuff which is relevant to the question. And that word reading there, I know it sounds obvious, but it's as much about reading the question as it is about reading the text. Don't overlook how important it is to really closely read the question so you know what it is you're being asked to do. So what will often happen at the beginning of one of these exams is you're given a question which is fairly straightforward. It might ask you for key facts, it might ask you to look at statistics and so on and so forth. There's no opinion, okay? I think that's the main thing to talk about here. Most of these exams you'll look at, if you look at the AQA and the OCR particularly, they don't ask you to explain yourself, they don't ask you to give any sort of opinion or analysis. All they actually do is ask you to write stuff down. So what you're doing is you're finding the information in the text and writing it down. It's pretty quick, pretty easy, and you should be able to get marks fairly quickly for that. So think of these particular answers as fairly easy marks. What else? Slightly more difficult. How well you read between the lines, tone, opinion, purpose. So looking deeper, bringing in your opinion, or it might be the opinion of an interviewee, for example. This often happens. You'll often have a newspaper article and it will ask you what the opinion of the interviewee, your opinion, or maybe the writer's opinion. So you've got these different types of opinions. What the text is for, and how it achieves it, and the opinion. This I think links back into the writer's opinion. The opinion of the writer will really often colour the tone of voice, angry, light-hearted, and so on and so forth. So we'll look a lot at this idea of tone as well. This is a big one because you'll use this for your reading and for your writing. I've used the word spotting here. You need to be a little bit careful about spotting. It's not just listing them. It's not just listing techniques. You can see long sentences and lots of commas and short sentences and emotive words and blah, 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 blah. Anyone can do that. You need to say how they're used and you need to say why they're used. You need to say the effect. That word there, really big word there that we'll talk about a lot. What is the effect of the different techniques on you, the reader, and why did the writer choose them? So, for example, if it's a persuasive text, the use of emotive language, or if it's an argument, the use of two sides, balanced. So these things we'll look at in lots and lots more detail, both with reading and analysis, but also your own writing. So I've used the word spotting, but I don't mean spotting just in writing a list. I really do linking the spotting into how and why these techniques are used, both for reading and then for your own writing. Some exam boards, like AQA for example, ask you to compare. To be honest with you, I've never been a big fan of this whole comparison lark, but they ask you to do it, so you need to learn how to do it. You can get two texts. It might be, for example, a newspaper article and a leaflet. And it might be that the subject matter is similar. And it will ask you how they treat it. So the treatment of that subject matter. So I don't know, let's just say, for example, it's poverty in Africa. And it might be that you have a leaflet from a charity which is asking you to give money, and it might be compared with a piece of travel writing, which an article in a newspaper or magazine which details someone's journey into the same country. And you'll look at the way in which the leaflet structures its language, the leaflet's laid out, and you compare it with the way that the article is laid out and the language the article is using, and the way in which you've got an informative piece versus a persuasive piece. So it's those techniques, I suppose. It's comparing techniques right the way through. And also thinking about both audience and purpose. That your persuasive leaflet may well have a very different audience. Probably not, actually, to be honest with you. A lot of persuasive leaflets you find in the same sorts of magazines that you might have some travel writing, but they'll have different purposes. One will be to inform, one might be to inform. So you might have a question mark there. Is it to inform? Is it to persuade? And so on and so forth. So it's the way in which you might compare different types of article, and you need to work out what they are in the exam. You need to work out whether one's informative and one's persuasive. So what we'll do over the next few lessons is we'll look specifically at the sorts of techniques that writers use to inform, persuade, describe, and so on and so forth. Because once you've learnt them, it's pretty straightforward, if I'm honest. He says, I know, I'll make it sound easy. I know it's not when you're in the exam, but the more ammunition you have, particularly with English language, the more ammunition you have, the easier it is. It's just techniques as much as anything. There's nothing particularly difficult about it. Honest. So yeah, I was just talking about audience there again. So understanding the importance of audience and how audience shapes texts. Okay, remember that. That audience will shape text. That the language that's used, the structure, the layout, so on and so forth, even things like punctuation, that audience shapes text, that writers are writing for an audience. No writer, but your students are about the only writers in the world. I often wonder this. Students are about the only writers in the world who write for one person. How bizarre is that? You're writing for your teacher all the way through school, and then when you sit your exam, you're writing for an examiner, someone you're never ever going to meet. It's the most bizarre process. So probably your experience is so utterly divorced from the real world. But there we are. At the end of the day, you have to pass your exam. But you're going to write for a writer's writing for an audience, and you need to work out again what are the techniques that the writer's using, which are appealing. How does the writer appeal to the particular audience? If you look at two articles, you've probably done this in the media studies element of your course. So it's that fairly generic thing that teachers do, where they'll look at a tabloid newspaper and they'll look at a broadsheet like the Telegraph, the Daily Mail versus the Telegraph, and how they compare the same story and how they treat the same story. So how does the writer appeal to your audience? Is your audience right wing, left wing, young, old, so on and so forth? So audience shapes text. That word there we'll come on to quite a lot in the future. Because it's not just about you spotting the techniques of others, it's also about you shaping your own text when you come to write your own in the second half of the exam. And then, as I said, your own writing, you take all of that, all the techniques, and you use it in your own writing. It's a bit like a menu, I suppose. It's like different menus. You might have your persuasive writing menu, or you might have your argument writing menu. And if you've learnt them, it's like being a chef. Once you've got your ingredients, actually all you do is you compile them. You put them together. You mash them together. And like a really good chef knows how ingredients works, you need to know how the techniques work. I think that's probably the best analogy that I can use for this. That you take your raw ingredients, your emotive words, your short sentences, your use of particular types of punctuation, your use of particular types of image and blah blah blah, and you mash them all together and you cook them up and you serve them to the examiner and they lick their lips and go, "That's very tasty," and they give you an A star or something like that. So that's it really. I mean, as I said, it's a fairly straightforward exam, and it doesn't matter which exam board you take. The control conditions that you've done, that you'll probably be very, very glad that you no longer ever have to do those again. They're in the past. Now you're sitting in an exam, and the actual exam itself is pretty straightforward. So you read for information, you look for tone, opinion and purpose. This is usually the first question. These are the second two questions. Usually the technique spotting comes a little bit further on. Usually the last question is a comparative question. And then again, linking to that comparative question, you're looking at audience here and how audience shape text. And then at the end of it, you have section B, where you use all of these ideas to inform your own writing. I'm putting these all onto YouTube, but my website, Third Space Academy, will also have them on. So visit either or both. And I hope you found this useful, and there will be more to follow.